The lesson this morning is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 28, verses 1 through 15. I'll be reading from a different version that is in your pews. This is called The Message by Eugene Peterson, so it might be a little hard to follow along if you're going to try and follow the words. A familiar story here in Matthew's Gospel. After the Sabbath, as the first light of the new week dawned, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to keep vigil at the tomb. Suddenly the earth reeled and rocked under their feet as God's angel came down from heaven, came right up to where they were standing. He rolled back the stone and then sat on it. Shafts of light blazed from him. His garments shimmered snow white. The guards at the tomb were scared to death. They were so frightened they couldn't move. The angel spoke to the women. "There's nothing to fear here. I know you're looking for Jesus, the one they nailed to the cross. He's not here. He was raised just as he said. Come and look at the place where he was placed. Now get on your way quickly and tell his disciples, he is risen from the dead. He is going on ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there." That's the message. The women, deep in wonder and full of joy, lost no time in leaving the tomb. They ran to tell the disciples. Then Jesus met them, stopping them in their tracks. "Good morning," he said. They fell to their knees, embraced his feet, and worshipped him. Jesus said, "You're holding on to me for dear life. Don't be frightened like that. Go tell my brothers that they are to go to Galilee, and that I'll meet them there." Meanwhile, the guards had scattered, but a few of them went into the city and told the high priest everything that had happened. They called a meeting of the religious leaders and came up with a plan. They took a large sum of money and gave it to the soldiers, bribing them to say, "His disciples came in the night and stole the body while we were sleeping." They assured them, "If the governor hears about your sleeping on duty, we'll make sure you don't get blamed." The soldiers took the bribe and did as they were told. That story, cooked up in the Jewish High Council, is still going around. May God's blessing be upon the hearing and the understanding of this holy word. So I want to tell you a story this morning. My name is Claudius. I'm a Roman guard, as you can tell. My dad's a guard. My brothers are guards. It's kind of a family thing, one of those you get the job, you can't lose it kind of thing. But I don't really like it. You see, our job, we take advantage of people. We go after people who can't pay their money on their lands, and we take their lands from them. And sometimes we take people's lands who can pay their money, and we arrest people who aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And then other times we arrest people just because maybe we're bored. And it gets worse than that, but I don't really want to get into all that this morning. All I can say is I don't really like it. I don't like the idea that we're doing this and we're living this way. I've got a family. I've got a wife. I've got a couple of kids that I have to support, and so that's kind of why I keep the job. Well, one day I'd been doing my job for about 5 years, and Pontius Pilate, who's the Roman governor, he's my boss, he called a few of us in and he said, "You know, the Passover celebration's coming up in Jerusalem." And we said, "Yeah, we know." And he said, "Now you remember what happened last year, don't you?" And of course, we all remember that week was a mess. There were riots, there was fighting, there was all kinds of stuff going on in the city. And Pilate said, "We're not going to have that happen again this year at all." And he said, "So here's my plan." And what he decided was we were going to have a parade into Jerusalem. And so we got out our best horses and our helmets and our armor and our weapons and the gold eagles that we would carry around Pilate. And we marched into town. But this was really unlike any parade that you've ever seen. There weren't people standing on the sides of the roads cheering. We weren't throwing out candy, nothing like that. In fact, there really wasn't anybody on the side of the road. Most people were kind of in their houses just peeking out their windows. We knew they could see us, and so Pilate thought he was making a point. He was saying, you know, if they see us coming in with all these weapons, then they're going to know not to mess around. Well, it didn't work. By the time we got into Jerusalem, we had already heard that there was trouble in the temple. That's the place that all of the pilgrims going into Jerusalem would have been going to worship. And so we immediately had to go over to the temple. And when we got there, things were crazy. There was tables on the floor, and there was money all over the place, and there were doves flying around, and people were running around like crazy trying to catch doves and put them back in cages and scoop up money. And we said, "What happened?" And they said all these peasants came in and they started flipping tables and dumping out our money and releasing the bird cages, and they were led by a guy named Jesus. Now, we'd heard of this Jesus before. of course, everybody knew who he was. He sort of was out in the countryside and preaching and teaching, and we didn't really pay a lot of attention to him, although now that he was in the city, we figured we probably should. And so the next day after I did my duty at the temple, you see now Pilate had us guarding the temple so that didn't happen anymore. After I did my duty, I went out and I tried to find Jesus. He wasn't hard to find. I took off all the clothing that made me look like a Roman guard, and I put on some peasant clothing so that I could fit in a little bit. And I went out and I expected to see someone jumping up and down and getting people all in a frenzy and excited, and that's not what I saw at all. I saw a guy, and he was just kind of sitting like a rabbi might, telling some stories, beautiful stories really, pretty much all of which said, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And as I was thinking, and I was listening to those stories, and I was thinking about my job and how I didn't really want to raise my children in a world where people like me did the jobs that we do, I thought maybe this guy's onto something. Well, I hid in the back so he wouldn't see me, and then I snuck out before he was done and went back to work the next day, and I kept thinking about Jesus and about these stories. And then Pilate called us in, and he said, you know, if you see this Jesus doing anything, you hear him doing anything, let us know. He's our top priority. And so the guards, we listened. Fast forward in the story a little bit later on in the week, Thursday came, finished my job at the temple. It was actually a pretty quiet week after all that beginning stuff. And we were sitting around at night, and that's when we got the call, all hands on deck. We were to report to a place called the Garden of Gethsemane. And so we all figured that this must have something to do with Jesus. Nothing else would get Pilate this excited. And so we all went there, and it was crazy. There were so many of us and so many weapons and so many people. And we saw Jesus kind of leaning on a rock, praying maybe. We didn't really know. And he had some friends around him who looked like they were sleeping. They didn't really appear to be doing a whole lot of anything. And then a couple of the guards ran over. They grabbed Jesus really hard, and they took him off. And I didn't follow them. I'd seen this happen enough to know what happens. If anybody gets Pilate that mad, it usually doesn't end real well for them. And so they went that way, and I went this way. And when I got back to where we were staying, I heard that, in fact, what had happened is that they had sentenced this Jesus to death, and that he was going to die the next day. Well, some of the guards woke up the next morning, and they were all excited to go and watch this. And I said, you know, I'm not feeling good. My stomach, I just couldn't stomach watching this person who had been preaching love go and get crucified. I couldn't bear to watch. So I stayed home, and they went to that spooky old hill. I didn't even like to go near that place. And I could hear all the commotion and the noise and knew what was happening. And then it got really quiet afterwards, and of course we knew what happened then. He must have died. Well, that night Pilate called us all back together again, and he said, you know what, we're not going to be guarding the temple anymore. We don't need to do that. We're now going to go and guard the tomb where Jesus' body is buried. Because his followers said that he was going to rise after 3 days, and we don't need any of that monkey business going on. We don't need his followers coming in and stealing the body and saying, oh, look, he raised from the dead. We don't need any of that. So we're going to guard that tomb. We're going to put a seal across the entrance. No one's going to get into that tomb. And so we went the next day. We guarded the tomb. It was the Sabbath day. It was pretty quiet. Not a whole lot happened. But then Sunday came, and I had a feeling something was off. Something was going to happen. And we got to the tomb, and the guards that we were taking over for early in the morning, they were fidgety. They were sort of scared. They said they'd been hearing noises all night, strange stuff happening, and they couldn't get out of there fast enough. The other guards were laughing at them. But I had this feeling something's going on here today. Well, it was just a couple of minutes later that I was looking down the pathway that we had walked up, and a couple of women were approaching us, and they appeared to be carrying something in their hands, spices maybe, because they hadn't anointed the body the day before. It was the Sabbath. But before I could actually talk to them, that's when the earthquake hit. And we're not talking a little rumble. We're talking a big earthquake. We're talking trees falling down. We're talking rocks cracking, all kinds of crazy stuff happening. And then lightning. On a crystal clear sky day like today, blue sky, lightning. So we're watching this and then realizing that it's actually not lightning because the light has kind of settled on top of that tomb. Well, I tell you, that was enough for the guards around me. They were out. They passed out in fear. And so I figured I should probably fall down too, but kind of kept my eyes open to watch and realized that light that was on the tomb was actually not a light. It was a person, an angel, something. and then watched in amazement as that big stone, the one with the seal on it, just got rolled away with ease. And then those two women came further up and they looked in the tomb, and the angel said to them, "If you're looking for Jesus, he's not here. He's gone. The body has been raised." And sure enough, we all kind of looked in, or I looked in and the women looked in, and there was a cloth in there, nothing else. Well, those women went racing from the tomb, and they went down that pathway, and they ran into a man there, and they spoke to him for a couple of minutes, and then just kept running on their way. And then that man kept walking up the hill towards me, and then he reached down and he offered me a hand and helped me up, and I looked at him and I realized that this was the same guy that we had seen teaching earlier in the week in Jerusalem. This was Jesus, and he said to me, he said, "Claudius, I saw you that day. I saw you listening to those stories, and I can feel you now that you believe in the power of God's love. You believe that something amazing just happened. You believe that God's love might be able to change the world like I was talking about." And I said, "Maybe, but what can I do? I'm one person. How can I do anything?" And Jesus said, "That's the thing. They tried to kill God's love when they killed me, but the reality is you can't kill God's love. God's love is stronger than hatred. It's stronger than violence. It's stronger than death. It's stronger than anything. Love always wins. God always wins. Don't you see? That's why I'm here. And if you take that love and you put that love in your hearts and you go forth into the world to share that love, you can change the world like I tried to change the world, and I've started to change the world." And with that, he vanished. Well, about that time, the other guards who had kind of passed out, they'd woken up and they saw what happened, and we went to Pilate and we reported back in what had happened. And Pilate was pretty quick thinking. He started dishing out money to everybody. He's saying, "Don't say anything, don't say anything. Tell them that you fell asleep and the followers raised him from the dead and they stole the body." And well, I can tell you, I didn't want to do that. I didn't take the money. I didn't spread those lies. I wasn't going to do anything. In fact, that was the last day that I worked for Pilate. I hung up my helmet that day and realized that if God's love was strong enough to raise Jesus from the dead, then maybe it was strong enough to change the world, and I should at least give it a good try. Friends, we're here on a special day, Easter Sunday, a day when we probably come with lots of questions. How can this happen? Why did this happen? Did it really happen the way we heard it? Those questions we can talk about, we can think about tomorrow, but not today. Today is a day to remember one thing. God's love is stronger than anything. It's stronger than hatred. It's stronger than violence. It's stronger than death. That's the message of Easter Sunday. God wins. Love wins. God's love is stronger than anything. And so our mission today is to take the love that we have witnessed here this day back out into the world with us. Because if a love that strong can raise someone from the dead, then surely if we live with that love in our hearts, then a love that strong can change the world. Easter is God's message to us to say, I started something, it's your job to finish it. Let's make it happen. Amen. Our final hymn is 192 in your red hymnal, The Day of Resurrection.